Welcome to the Deep Dive. Today we're looking at some really interesting research focusing on how we might encourage more sustainable habits, specifically around water and energy use. You brought us a paper, it's titled, Potential of Large Language Model-Powered Nudges for Promoting Daily Water and Energy Conservation.
That's the one.
And this feels incredibly relevant, doesn't it? I mean, we all know the pressure on resources is increasing. Urbanization, population growth.
Right, the projections are pretty stark. Domestic consumption is set to jump significantly by 2050.
So finding ways to get people to conserve, it's not just a nice idea anymore. It's becoming, well, essential.
Absolutely. And the traditional ways, economic stuff, big education campaigns, tech fixes, they have their limits. Costly sometimes, or just not very effective.
Which is where this paper comes in, exploring maybe a smarter, more personalized approach using AI, specifically large language models, or LLMs.
Exactly. The core question here, thinking about it from a behavioral science angle, is can we use these powerful AI models, these LLMs, to make those little behavioral nudges work better for conservation?
Nudges. So, subtle suggestions, not forcing anyone, but guiding choices.
Precisely. You might have seen things like energy bills showing how your usage compares to neighbors. That's a classic nudge.
Okay.
They've had some success, reducing consumption maybe 1 to 15% in different settings, homes, hotels, universities. But this paper argues they often lack really targeted, actionable content.
So just knowing you use more energy than next door isn't enough. You need ideas on what to do.
That's the hypothesis. And they thought, well, LLMs are great at processing info and generating tailored text. Maybe they can provide that missing piece.
Makes sense. So how did they test this?
They ran a pretty large randomized controlled trial on a university campus, over 1,500 students involved.
Okay.
And they had 3 groups. The control group, Group C, got no nudges at all.
Standard baseline.
Yep. Then treatment group 1, T1, got what you might call traditional nudging. They saw their current and past usage data, plus those social comparisons, like how they stacked up against others.
Got it. The usual stuff.
And then treatment group 2, T2, got the LLM-powered treatment. So they got the usage stats, plus personalized conservation suggestions generated by an LLM, along with estimates of how much they could actually save.
So T2 is the key group here, with the AI suggestions layered on top. And they were measuring intention, willingness to conserve.
Primarily, yes. Conservation intention, basically. How willing people said they were to put effort into saving water and energy. They looked at things like attention to the nudge content, awareness of their usage, and their stated behavioral intentions.
Okay, so a carefully designed experiment. Did the AI actually make a difference?
Yeah.
Did T2 show more intention than T1 or the control?
Oh, yeah. The findings were quite striking. First off, nudging in general, both T1 and T2, did significantly increase conservation intentions compared to the control group. So nudging works to some extent.
Okay, good to confirm.
But here's the kicker. The LLM-powered group, T2, saw a maximum increase of 18.0% in conservation intentions.
18%, that sounds pretty high.
It is. And crucially, that was 88.6% higher than the increase seen in the traditional nudge group, T1.
Wow, wait, so the LLM nearly doubled the effectiveness of the nudge?
Essentially, yes. In terms of boosting intention, it was vastly more powerful. That's potentially huge, especially when you think about deploying this kind of thing cheaply at scale using AI.
Definitely. Any other interesting bits in the results?
Well, yeah. They noticed that the traditional nudges, T1, mostly seemed to impact people's awareness of their usage, made them realize how much they were using.
Okay, that makes sense, seeing the numbers.
But the LLM nudges, T2, had a much stronger effect on actual behavioral change intentions. People weren't just more aware, they were more willing to say they'd do something differently.
So it bridged the gap between awareness and action, or at least intended action.
It seems that way. And here's a really fascinating detail. The participants in T2, the ones getting the AI tips, they actually rated those specific LLM-generated suggestions as the least important part of the message they received.
Huh. That seems contradictory. They were most influenced by it, but didn't think it was that important.
Exactly. It suggests the LLM's impact might have been happening on a level they weren't fully consciously processing. Maybe the tailored nature just resonated differently, even if they didn't pinpoint the suggestions themselves as the key factor.
That's wild. Kind of a subconscious nudge enhancement. Did the study dig into whether this worked the same for everyone, or did it vary?
It did vary, and that's super important for applying this. They used some advanced modeling causal forests to look beyond the averages and see how effects differed across groups.
Okay, what did that show?
Well, a few things stood out. Men, for instance, showed more pronounced increases in conservation intentions, regardless of which nudge type they got.
Interesting.
Undergraduates seemed more impacted by the nudges overall compared to graduate students.
Maybe grad students are already more set in their ways or busier.
Could be. And here's one that makes you think. People who were actually responsible for paying electricity bills, they were less responsive to the suggestions.
Really? You'd think they'd be more interested in saving money.
Perhaps. Or maybe they're already more conscious of their usage because they see the bill, so the nudge adds less new information or motivation for them compared to someone less aware.
Okay, that makes a kind of sense. Any other groups?
Yeah, a few more. Participants who usually commute by bike or walking showed greater increases in intention, maybe already a bit more environmentally minded.
Plausible.
Also, those with lower monthly expenditures saw bigger changes in intention, suggesting the nudges might be more effective for people who are more price sensitive.
Right, the savings aspect might resonate more.
And one more, those spending slightly longer times in their dormitories also showed increased intention changes. The researchers speculated maybe roommate influence plays a role there.
Fascinating. So it's definitely not a uniform effect. Understanding these differences is key if you want to tailor these nudges effectively.
Absolutely. It highlights that need to move beyond just broad strokes.
So we know the LLM nudges were more effective, almost doubly so, and that the effect varied. But why? What was the mechanism? What did the AI do differently, psychologically speaking?
Right. That's the million-dollar question. They used another technique, structural equation modeling, or SIM, to try and map out those psychological pathways.
Okay, what did the sim reveal?
One really significant finding was that the LLM-powered nudges seem to weaken the role of social networks, things like perceived neighborhood norms in driving conservation intentions.
Wait, weaken social influence. Isn't social proof usually a big part of nudging?
It often is, yes. But here, it suggests the LLM nudges were perhaps helping people find more internal reasons to conserve, making it less about keeping up with the Joneses, so to speak, and more about their own decisions.
More autonomous motivation. Interesting.
Exactly. And linked to that, the LLM nudges significantly boosted two key things: self-efficacy and outcome expectations.
Okay, break those down. Self-efficacy is?
Your confidence in your own ability to successfully conserve, like, I actually can do these things and make a difference.
Right, and outcome expectations.
That's your belief about the positive results that will come from conserving, saving money, helping the environment, feeling good about it, whatever resonates.
Got it. So the AI tips made people feel more capable and more convinced of the benefits.
Precisely. And at the same time, the LLM nudges help decrease the perceived impediments, the difficulties or hassles people might associate with conserving energy or water.
So it made it seem easier and more worthwhile, driven by internal factors rather than just social pressure.
That seems to be the key pathway they identified. It strengthens intrinsic motivation, which is generally seen as a much more powerful driver for sustained behavior change than just relying on social norms, which is often where traditional nudges stop.
That makes a lot of intuitive sense. Personalized, actionable advice that boosts your confidence and highlights personal benefits.
Yeah, I can see how that would be more powerful than just your neighbors use less.
Definitely feels like a more robust foundation for change.
Did the researchers try to estimate the real-world impact if these intentions turn into actual behavior change? Like, what could the savings look like?
They did, and the numbers are pretty attention-grabbing. Just for the single university campus where they ran the study, they estimated potential annual savings of around 3.36 million kilowatt hours of electricity.
Wow.
And about 0.11 million cubic meters of water. Again, that's if the stated intentions fully translate into action, which is always a caveat.
Sure, the intention-behavior gap is real, but still, those are big potential savings for one campus.
And then they extrapolated. If you applied this across all higher education institutions in China, the potential savings jumped to roughly 1.14 billion kilowatt hours of electricity and 0.04 billion cubic meters of water annually.
Billion with a B, that's staggering. It is. They put it in context, too, relating it to the annual consumption of a very significant number of residents. It really underscores the potential scale.
And presumably the cost of deploying these LLM nudges isn't astronomical.
That's another key point they emphasized. Compared to, say, large infrastructure projects or massive subsidy programs, implementing LLM-powered nudges via apps or emails is potentially very low cost.
So huge potential impact, relatively low cost.
Yeah.
That's a compelling combination. Could you give us a bit of historical context? Where does this LLM approach fit in the broader story of behavioral science and conservation efforts?
Sure. Well, it really builds on the whole field of behavioral economics, which gained prominence, with work showing we aren't always perfectly rational actors.
Right, the work of Feller, Kahneman.
Exactly. And that led to this idea of nudging as a policy tool. In the conservation space, people have tried various ways to give feedback for years. Things like smart meters that show real-time usage, or those little in-home energy displays.
I remember those.
Did they work well?
Mixed results, really. The challenge often was getting the information to be timely, relevant, and actionable for the individual. A simple display might raise awareness, but it doesn't tell you what specific actions will save the most energy for you.
Back to that actionability gap.
Right. And that's where LLMs seem to offer a leap forward. They can process complex individual usage data, if available, or even just generate plausible, relevant suggestions based on context and do it in a personalized way that older tech just couldn't manage at scale.
So it's like upgrading from a generic leaflet to a personalized AI coach, giving you specific plays based on your situation.
That's a pretty good analogy, yeah. It's about making the advice smarter and more tailored.
Okay, fascinating stuff. It really feels like LLMs could unlock a new level of effectiveness for these kinds of behavioral interventions. Let's shift gears slightly now to our novel notions segment. Based on this paper, what are some new research ideas or directions this sparks?
Okay, novel notions. Well, building directly on this, one really exciting direction, I think, is integrating real-time sensor data.
Real time. So not just looking at last month's bill.
Exactly. Imagine your smart meter or maybe even sensors and building systems feeding data constantly or near constantly to an LLM.
Oh, what?
The LLM could then analyze patterns as they happen and adjust the personalized suggestions dynamically. So maybe it detects you're taking a much longer shower than usual.
Uh-oh.
And it could potentially send a very gentle, context-aware nudge right then or shortly after. Maybe something like, noticed a longer shower today, just FYI, shortening by 2 minutes could save X amount of water energy.
Whoa, immediate feedback.
Right. It moves beyond periodic nudges based on aggregated data to potentially event-driven real-time feedback. The research question then becomes, does this hyper-personalization and immediacy boost self-efficacy and behavior change even more? Does that tight feedback loop really solidify new habits?
That's a really compelling idea, having that almost instantaneous connection between action and feedback. What's another notion?
Another area, maybe touching on the ethics and practicalities, is exploring the potential for unintended consequences or user reactions to these highly personalized nudges.
The potential downsides. Like feeling spied on.
Potentially, yeah. Could overly specific suggestions feel intrusive, manipulative even? How do different personality types react? Some might love the detailed advice. Others might feel pressured or annoyed, what psychologists sometimes call reactants.
Right, pushing back against feeling controlled.
Exactly. So future research could really dig into user perceptions, not just measuring behavior change, but doing qualitative work interviews, focus groups to understand trust, privacy concerns, feelings about autonomy.
And you need to be careful the LLM isn't reinforcing weird biases, right? Based on the data it learned from.
That's a crucial point, too. Could it inadvertently create or amplify inequalities in resource expectations or suggestions based on learned biases? So exploring the ethical design and deployment is critical. And of course, just a disclaimer, these are speculative ideas, food for thought.
Understood. Both really interesting avenues, though, the potential for real-time adaptation and the crucial need to consider the user experience and ethical implications. Great stuff. So wrapping up this deep dive, the big takeaway from this research seems pretty clear. LLM-powered nudges hold really significant promise for promoting water and energy conservation.
Yeah, by apparently tapping into that intrinsic motivation, boosting confidence, highlighting benefits, making it feel easier rather than just relying on social comparisons.
And offering that tailored, actionable advice seems key. It suggests a potentially very cost-effective and scalable tool for tackling resource scarcity, which is only going to become more critical.
Definitely. The potential scale, combined with the low implementation cost, is very attractive.
It really makes you wonder, doesn't it? How else could this kind of AI-driven personalization be used to encourage other positive changes, in health, finance, education, in our own lives and communities?
Lots of possibilities there.
Absolutely. Well, for anyone listening who wants to get into the nitty-gritty of this particular study, the link to the paper is, as always, available in the show notes. Thanks for joining us for this deep dive.